Hi there. In this video, I wanted to give a brief overview of these biological macromolecules that we'll be discussing. So we'll talk about 4 biological macromolecules. We'll think about some characteristics that all 4 have in common. And then in some other videos, I'll talk specifically about each kind of macromolecule. So, in biology, there are 4 kinds of macromolecules. If we want to build a biological organism starting from scratch, mostly we just need these 4 things and we can make cells and organs and tissues and all that kind of stuff. So what are those macromolecules? So we're going to name the 4. I hope that these 4 will be that 3 of these 4 will be very obvious in that they are kinds of foods we tend to eat. So much of this vocabulary will be closely related to the vocabulary we use around nutrition. So let's take a look. So the first kind of macromolecule that we're going to talk about is a carbohydrate. Carbohydrates are found in all sorts of our foods. Some obvious examples are shown here in this picture. Bread is a carbohydrate. Pastas are carbohydrates. Right? Anything made from a grain is a carbohydrate. In the end, carbohydrates are built out of sugars. And they're a major one of our nutritional categories. So one of the macromolecules we need to build living things are carbohydrates. All right. Another are proteins. So here again are some examples of proteins. We've got salmon steaks and some pork and some chicken. When we think of protein, mostly we think of meat or muscle. So meat or muscle is made mostly of protein. But all sorts of things inside cells and living organisms are made out of protein. And protein is critically important to the function of biological organisms. We'll talk really in depth about the functions of proteins and all kinds of jobs that they can do. So we've got carbohydrates and proteins. The next category that again should be familiar if we think about nutrition are what we call lipids. Now lipids, if we wanted to use more common terminology, would be things like fats and oils. So here again are some examples: butter, mayonnaise, oils and salad dressings, right? All of these are examples of lipids. Again, biological organisms could not function without fats or lipids. So those 3 I hope are at least familiar to you. The last one we don't really speak about when we're thinking about nutrition and nutritional components, but that doesn't mean it's not important. And those are this group of nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are DNA and RNA. We'll talk a lot about DNA and RNA throughout our course, but nucleic acids serve really important roles in the cell, mostly for information storage and transferring information. DNA and RNA are found in every single cell that exists. So when we eat food, right, food was living organisms. When we eat food that is composed of living organisms, we're eating those organisms' DNA and RNA. We need it so that we can build our own DNA and RNA. But nucleic acids aren't listed on nutritional labels the way carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids are. So those are the 4 kinds of macromolecules we're going to be learning about. Again, they're critically important to biological function, and they have some characteristics in common. So let's address those common characteristics. And then, again, some other videos, I'll tell you about the specific details for each kind of macromolecule. All right, so the first thing all of these macromolecules have in common is that they are what we call polymers. And I think this word polymer is pretty straightforward. Polymer just means many units. So macromolecules are big molecules made up of lots of individual subunits, sort of like putting together a Lego set. We take all these individual bricks and we put them together into a big completed Lego set. So a polymer is made up of many units. The units that we're going to build the polymer out of are called monomers. So mono just means one, right? One unit, monomer. So if we wanted to visualize these macromolecules, again, another word for them is polymer, we could think about a whole bunch of monomer subunits And then to turn these monomer subunits into a polymer, we just have to connect them together. So again, a polymer is just a whole bunch of monomer subunits connected together by bonds. And so here I've got these black lines to indicate covalent bonds attaching the monomers together into a long chain. That long chain is a polymer. That's what all of our macromolecules look like. Long chains of individual subunits attached together. All right, so the other common thing we want to address is how we construct these polymers. So all four of the polymers that we talked about, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids, are made through a common kind of chemical reaction called dehydration synthesis. So we're going to be synthesizing our polymer, and there's dehydration involved. Hopefully you've heard of dehydration before, but just to make clear, dehydration is the loss or removal of water. So dehydration synthesis is a chemical reaction where water gets removed. So I'll show you a picture in just a second. Sometimes, instead of calling these reactions dehydration synthesis, scientists will also use the terminology condensation reaction. Same thing, condensation relates to water, right? Condensation is when water collects on the surface of an object, right? We get droplets of water. So during condensation reactions, we're going to collect some water. We're going to dehydrate one thing and collect some water. So let me show you a picture of what I'm talking about. Here are two monomers. The monomers that we use to make polymers out of will always have these hydroxyl groups available on them. The hydroxyl groups contain an oxygen and a hydrogen, right? And from those hydroxyl groups, we can remove one oxygen and two hydrogens to produce a water molecule. So this is where the dehydration comes in. We're removing water from the monomers, and we're producing the water here. That's where the condensation comes in as well. We've just created this water droplet. We created a molecule of water, condensation, by doing this reaction. When we remove the water from these two monomers, we can replace these missing oxygens and hydrogens with a covalent bond that connects the two monomers together to begin forming our polymer. So every one of the polymers or macromolecules that we're going to discuss is built in this exact same way. Take monomers, remove one oxygen and two hydrogens to make a water. When you do that, you leave behind a covalent bond connecting the monomers together. All right, the last detail I want us to pay attention to is how we can break polymers apart. So again, these macromolecules we're thinking about, carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, are things we eat. And we often break them apart to get energy out of them. So that's why we eat food. So let's look at the chemical reaction that breaks these things apart when we digest them. So the chemical reactions that do that are called hydrolysis reactions, not synthesis. Hydrolysis reactions. So a hydrolysis reaction, again, I hope the name is somewhat informative, because hydro sort of means relating to water. Maybe you've heard of a hydroelectric power plant. So hydro is relating to water. Lysis refers to disintegration, decomposition, or just breaking, right? So we're going to use water, hydro, to lyse things, to break them. Water breaking is what these kinds of reactions do. So here's a picture, right? So hydrolysis is breaking with water. And here's a picture. We've got our two monomers attached together with their covalent bond. If we add water in, we can replace those oxygen and hydrogen atoms that we removed during the dehydration synthesis reaction. And we can break that covalent bond holding the two monomers together. And we just remade the monomers out of this polymer. So there are four kinds of macromolecules. They're all made out of individual subunits called monomers. Each of the macromolecules is made out of a different kind of monomer, but I'll tell you about that in a different video. To put the monomers together into a polymer, we do these dehydration reactions. And if we ever want to break the monomers apart from their polymer form, we can do these hydrolysis reactions. And those are the main characteristics that all of the macromolecules have in common. So in some other videos, I'll tell you about the details I want you to understand for each kind of macromolecule as we move forward. As always, let me know if you have any questions by contacting me in the discussion board or by email, and I'll talk to you soon.